Good evening. Glad to see everybody out this evening. We have some visitors, and we're glad for you to be here as well. This is our third night of our gospel meeting, and I'm sure we're in for a treat. He's done a great job thus far, and we appreciate you, and we're thankful for you and your family to be here, Mr. Mitchell. One announcement before we get started. Brian Chafin, he had a really good day today, and he was able to walk from the bed to the chair, and he said that was a long walk, but he made it. So that's wonderful that he was able to walk that far and do good. So let's continue to keep him in our prayers. Our first song is not in our songbooks. It's Psalms 19.
The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making the hearts of simple. Multitudes of heart and gold, gave them much fine gold. Of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. More to read His word, more they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is sweet, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be His word, more they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb.
Our next song is number 73 in the supplement. After this song, Brother Bruce Nelson will lead us in our first prayer. 73.
High above the seraphim sounds an everlasting hymn. Voices echo through the hall and shake the temple wall. Living creatures bless the King. 24 elders sing, worthy
song before the lesson will be number 820. My precious Savior suffered pain and agony, He bore it all, that I might live. He broke the bonds of sin and set the captive free. He bore it all, that I might live. His presence lived, He bore it all, that I might see His shining face. He bore it all, He bore it all, I lived and I live, I stood condemned to die, but Jesus took my place. He bore it all, that I might His presence live. They placed a crown of thorns upon my Savior's head. He bore it all, that I might live. And cruel man with spirit, silenced, pierced, and bled. He bore it all, that I might live. His presence lived. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face. He bore it all, He bore it all, I lived and I live, I stood condemned to die, but Jesus took my place. He bore it all, that I might His presence live. The Calvary's hill in shame, the blessed Savior trod. He bore it all, that I might live. Each week to these they crucified the Son of God. He bore it all, that I might live. His presence lived. He bore it all, that I might see His shining face. He bore it all, freely bore it all, I lived and I live, I stood condemned to die, but Jesus took my place. He bore it all, that I might live. His presence live. Song of encouragement will be number 380. 380.
Appreciate that good song, leading Adam. Had a great singing all week long. Appreciate your presence tonight. If you're visiting with us, we're so thankful for that. Got a good friend, Tommy, and his wife, Miss Smith, with us tonight, and we really appreciate them. I had to call Tommy last week and make sure that they came, Brother Fudge, because he was on my list of some. I had to get him and Shirley to come this week. But either way, they made it, and I appreciate them. And if you're visiting with us outside of that, we're super thankful too. Tonight we're going to talk about temperance or self-control. Temperance or self-control. In 2 Peter chapter 1, when Peter's talking about things that we need to add to our life as Christians, he says we need to add to our faith virtue and knowledge, and then the third one there is self-control. And in some translations, you'll see the word temperance. And since that's a word that maybe we don't use as much, let's think about temperance and self-control tonight in our lesson. One of the things that Robert told me just earlier is where he was eating, his wife wasn't in there when he told me, is when he got home last night, he went to his freezer, I imagine it was in his freezer, and he got one of these little ice cream popsicle type things, and he said he told his wife he knew he done ate it, he knew he done had dessert, but he was going to eat it anyways. And you know what? I can relate to that a lot. I lack a lot of self-control when it comes to food. And in life in general, having self-control is just an act of discipline. That's really what it amounts to. But if you look in the world that we live in and you see a lot of the problems and the sins that are in the world we live in, A lot of them stem from lack of self-control, lack of temperance. So I want to think about that tonight. And just as we do anytime we're studying God's Word, we want to examine ourselves. And I want us to think about in our own lives. You know, I can't answer for my wife, and she can't answer for me. We can help each other, and trust me, she tries to encourage me all the time, whether I want it or not. And sometimes I try to encourage her, whether she wants it or not. But we all need to gain and grow when it comes to self-control and temperance in our life. And when we do, life will be more peaceful. Life will be usually easier, and we'll find ourselves in a lot better situation a lot of the times when we exercise temperance and add that into our character in the life that we're living. I want to look at 5 ways tonight. 5 ways we need to exercise temperance and have self-control. And the first one, it has nothing to do, but a lot to do with what we talked about last night. But last night we were talking about social networking. Tonight we're talking about literally just talking, using words. We need to have temperance when it comes to our words. Let me ask you a question. Who do you think in this life loves you the most? I would say generally you would think of maybe your parents. Maybe you would think of your husband or your wife or your children. And that's what my answer would be. Would be my grandparents, my parents, my wife, my children. That would be who I would think would love me the most. And let me tell you something. If you can count the amount of people on one hand that truly, truly love you, you're doing good. Because there's a lot of people that don't have that many people that truly love them. True, unconditional love is hard to find on this earth, and that's what God had for us. Now, here's why I ask you that question. Who do you usually treat with the most disrespect, the least patience, and say things to a lot of times that later you think, out of all the people that love me, I talk to them worse than I do a lot of other people. It's usually those people. I've seen children talk to their parents in ways that you would say, did you really just say that to your parents? The people that birthed you and raised you and love you and cared for you and give you chance after chance when other people won't, and that's how you treat them? What about to your husband or your wife? I'm here to say tonight I've never said an ugly thing to my wife in 13 years of marriage. Well, she's here tonight, so let me correct that. Obviously, there's been days or times where I might have said something where I was like, man, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry that I said that. I can't believe I said that. Because she usually has my back more than anybody else. She shows me love when other people won't. So sometimes when it comes to our words, we don't have self-control around the people that love us the most. And there's so many ways we can sin when it comes to words. Let's think about that for a minute. What about lying? Is that a sin? Well, you can do that with your words. What about cursing? Is that a sin? Well, you can do that with words. What about saying God's name in vain? Wouldn't that be a sin? Well, you can do that with your words. You see how many sins already? In Ephesians, we're told to be kind and tenderhearted. Well, the opposite of that would be letting our anger out and spilling out words of disgust and hate. Well, that could be sinful. You see how many sins alone can come just from our mouth? Turn with me to James chapter 1 at verse 19, if you will. James spends a lot of time in the book of James talking about being careful how we use our words and our tongue. But one of the passages that I think is the best for this lesson tonight is chapter 1 at verse 19, where James says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." Slow to speak. Do you think that we would get ourselves in less trouble if we were more slow to speak at times? I can tell you, with problems I've had in my life before, I think a lot of those problems would have been resolved or never happened had I been slower to speak. But a lot of times I don't exercise temperance or self-control. I just say the first thing that comes. I say it without thinking of the consequence down the road or an immediate initial consequence. I just say it. And then a lot of times it's like, man, once this comes out of my mouth, you know how hard it is to catch words and put them back in? Do you realize how hard that is? One day there was a young man and he was walking and he saw a fence. And the fence had all these little holes in it. And he asked his dad, he said, Dad, what's all these holes for? And he said, well, what it was every time that I said something I shouldn't, I'd come out here and I'd take a nail and I'd nail that nail through that fence. It was a wooden fence. And he said, over the years, you see all these holes. That's times I said things I shouldn't have said or I wish I wouldn't have said. And he said, and you see these posts represent people. The thing is, I can pull these nails out and the fence is still standing, but those holes sometimes last forever. And that's sort of like words. They can scar. I can say, hey, Monica, I'm sorry for what I said. Hey, Matt, I'm sorry for what I said. Maybe I didn't even mention earlier, we talked about gossip. Another sin we can do with our words. But you know what? What I've already said has affected people. It can hurt people. And sometimes those scars are still there. So we need to have temperance and self-control. The more mature we get as a Christian, the better we should get at that. To say, wow, 5 years ago I would have said something right now. I'm not going to do it. This is what I would have said, but I'm going to try to handle this with more grace. I'm going to try to be more seasoned with salt. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 5 at verse 13, if you will. 1 Timothy chapter 5 at verse 13, and notice what Paul says to Timothy here. He says, and withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers and busybodies. Now listen to the last line. Speaking things which they ought not. How many times do our words come out and we're saying something that had been better had we just not said it? We ought not have said it. I should have had more discipline. I should have had more self-control and temperance. What about Proverbs? Turn with me and let's read from Proverbs. We're going to start at chapter 17 and read verses 27 and 28. Proverbs chapter 17, verses 27 and 28. He that has knowledge spares his words. You ever ask yourself, I see these things on TV about these IQ tests. I wonder what my IQ would be. Well, if I don't spare my words very good, I might not be real wise. And a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. Even a fool, when he holds his peace, is counted wise. And he that shuts his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. How many times would it have been better off if we'd have kept our lips shut? If we'd have said less words? Self-control, temperance with our words. That's a building block of growing as a Christian to have more Christ-like character. Another way that we need to have temperance is when it comes to financial spending. Matt, you done any lessons? Robert, you done any lessons on this lately? This is not one I plug into many lessons. But you know one of the problems we have at the local church over where I live is we have good people. I'm going to tie this into something we sort of hit on Sunday morning in our Bible class. We have good people that love the Lord, want to serve the Lord, but they also want to keep up with the Joneses. You ever been there? I get it. I want nice things. I want to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I want to have nice things on this earth. But sometimes in the process of that happening, we get out of control. And you know what happens when we get out of control? It relates to a lot of things we've said this week. I don't have as much time because I'm having to work all the time to pay for all these things. And now I don't have time for my children or my wife or my family. I don't have time for the church. I don't have time for spiritual activities. Why? Because I'm working all the time. Well, why are you working all the time? Well, it could be because you love to work. I think Robert talked about that earlier. Sometimes some people do it as a hobby. Rather than pick up an entertainment, they just work extra. But some people, it's because they can't handle their financial spending, and so they're so in debt, they're so involved in these things, it just consumes them. Do you keep up with the national debt? Do y'all keep up with this? As a country, we're in some real debt. I can't even tell you the number because as I've been standing here, it just went up $1 billion. I mean, literally, it's trillions of dollars. But have you seen lately? During COVID, people's savings started going up. But have you seen lately what's happened? We've got sort of the highest credit card debt ever. You ever known somebody that's got 8 or 10 credit cards? You ever, and you think, no. Yeah. Well, what happens is they become a slave to their spending habits. So you know what we do? We've got to have self-control. Do you know when you don't go grocery shopping? It's the same rule applies financially. When you're hungry. You go grocery shopping, you're hungry, it's like, put that in the cart, put that in the cart. You go eat a pizza at Papa John's and get full, and then just eat an extra piece, Matt, that night. Just eat an extra piece so that you're overly full. And then when you're walking down the aisles, you're like, I can't even look. It's going to make me sick. I'm so full. That's when you go shopping, right? That way, you're full and you're not wanting to buy everything else. It's the same here. People are addicted to spending. And what happens, you say, well, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with taking out a loan and buying a house and land. Amen. There's nothing wrong with buying. But there's a problem to when it gets us so in debt that we can't put God first in our life. To where now we're a slave to this world because we're trying to pay for everything and we have no time for spiritual things. We can't help others when they're in need. Why? Because of our financial spending habits. We didn't have any self-control. We weren't tempered in this moment. Turn me to Hebrews chapter 13 at verse 5. You know one of the best ways to solve this is to be content. If you can find that the things you have, the places you live, the lifestyle that you have is good enough and not let the things around you in the world make you want more, 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 sometimes that alone solves the problem. In Hebrews 13 at verse 5, he says, let your conversation be without covetousness. We understand the roots of covetousness, wanting other people's things, maybe our neighbors in the Old Testament, they're next to us. And be content with such things as you have. For he has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I may not have the finest of everything, but I've got what I need, and that's what I can afford, and still serve the Lord, and still be a father, and still be a husband, and still be a brother in Christ, without allowing my financial spending to affect my relationship with God and my family. But what does it take? Well, I need to be content, and that will help me have more self-control and temperance when it comes to these things. Look at Proverbs chapter 21 at verse 20. Proverbs 21 at verse 20. Let me tell you, guys, here, the problem I have with my wife is not a credit card. It's when she calls me and she's in Florence and says, I'm going to Sam's. And I'm like, oh, no, not Sam's. That's the one that gets me, is Sam's. Because I know we're going to, instead of buying 4 packs of toilet paper, we're going to have 26, and 26 rolls. Instead of 5 packs of muffins, we're going to have 32, That's when it gets, I'm like, oh, here we go. Look with me at Proverbs chapter 21 at verse 20. She won't get on me for that one later. She'll say, you're right. I know how it makes you feel. She knows. In Proverbs chapter 21, look at verse 20. There is treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise. Now listen to this. But a foolish man spends it up. We need to make sure that we understand sometimes it's okay to save, to build, to do without, to make sacrifices. And then a chapter over in Proverbs 22 verse 7, he says, the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. In the New Testament, we see a passage that says, owe no man anything except to love one another. What about us? One of the pictures I put on the screen says it's not your salary that makes you rich, it's your spending habits. And in a lot of ways that can be true. What about us? Do you have self-control and temperance when it comes to these things? And I was joking about my wife. She has great self-control and stewardship. It's just I know that Sam's always poses a real threat to us. What about us? Do we have temperance and self-control there? What about the third one? We need to have temperance and self-control when it comes to our reactions. To our reactions. How do you respond when people mistreat you, or ugly to you, or say something that offends you, or do something that bothers you? I have to admit, that's tough at times. That's hard. But who am I striving to be like? Christ. How would Christ act? Do you remember the New Testament? When Jesus comes across this adulterous woman and the crowd is wanting to stone her. Do you remember that story? What does Jesus say to the people? He said, which of you have never sinned, throw the first stone. Cast the first stone. What happened after a few hours? They all just disappeared. You know why? Because everybody there had sinned. A lot of times we react without temperance, without control. And we need to make sure we're careful not to do that, because it's an easy way to get ourselves in trouble. Look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 23. 1 Peter 2, at verse 23. Talking about Jesus here, it says, who when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but he committed himself to him that judges righteously. What would you do if people were reviling you, saying evil things about you, doing bad things to you, trying to bring down your name, or hurt you, or embarrass you? What about when he was threatened? You ever heard of revenge? You ever heard of revenge or vengeance? Do people like to take vengeance into their own hands? Do people want immediate revenge? That's not a Christ-like attitude. But you know what it takes to get to that point? Human nature says, I want revenge. Christ says, follow me. So we start to become more like Christ. How? By adding temperance and self-control in our life. I'll let the Lord handle that. He said He'll take care of it. That's not my job. I'm to love my enemies. I'm to treat them with respect. I'm to kill them with kindness so that they'll reap coals of fire on their head. All right, that's the plan, y'all. Now let's go to work tomorrow and see how we do it. On the way out, somebody says something, I can't believe it. Just that quick, we can forget and let it slip. Just that quick, we can react in a way that says, well, that wasn't very Christ-like. That's not how I should have handled that. Look at Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 29. Proverbs chapter 14 at verse 29. He that is slow to wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty of spirit exalts folly. That verse sums up this point. If I can have self-control and temperance when it comes to wrath, I can save myself a lot of problems. Let me give you the best example. You've seen it, I guarantee you've seen it. You've got a Major League Baseball player. He's 14-2 on the year as a starting pitcher, but he comes in, he has a bad game. They've already clinched the playoffs. They're just waiting to get there. Sounds like the Braves right now, right? But he has a bad game, Tommy, so he comes in and he throws his glove just as hard as he can at the wall, and then what's he do? That water cooler, he just wham! Well, now he just had a bad game, and now he's got a broke hand, and he's out for the playoffs, and he's got to have surgery. You've seen it happen. You've heard of it happen. What happened? You're on the golf course. Everything's looking good. Wham! Right in the water. Take that $400 driver to a $1,000 Callaway driver. Broke it in half. Well, now I just went from one bad play to I've got to buy a new $400 to $1,000 club. That wasn't real smart. Well, what happened? I lacked temperance and self-control, and I reacted harshly. I reacted without thinking, and now, just a few minutes later, I've calmed down and I can think straight. It's like, boy, I regret that. Boy, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I wish I wouldn't have done that. Reactions. Some of the biggest problems that people have in their lives, if they could just go back to one moment and redo a situation, would change it. And right here, as we're becoming more like Christ, that's what we've got to do. Slow down when it comes to wrath and anger. Think things through. Have self-control. Have temperance. Say, that was me before I was a Christian. Now that I'm a Christian, I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to be more like Christ. I'm not perfect, and I'm still working at it. But boy, the times I've done better, it sure does have better results. I sure do make better decisions. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7 at verse 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 at verse 9. Notice again, Solomon here what he says here. He says, be not hasty in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. Now I'll say this, I don't think it's anyone's goal to be a fool. So if that's the case, he says, that rests in the bosom of fools. That's what they, well, that's not who I want to be. Then I better exercise temperance and self-control when it comes to my reactions. When I'm angry, when I have wrath, when I want to spew something out of my mouth or say or do something, I need to calm down and think about it before I react. Another way that we need to have temperance in our life is with our thoughts. Let me tell you, one of the hardest parts for me about being a faithful Christian is thinking. It's one thing to say, don't do this. Amen. It's another thing to say, don't even think it. Man, That's another degree or level of hard. Maybe I didn't say it to them, but I thought it. Maybe I didn't let it happen, but I thought it. Man, that takes some real devotion, real commitment to trying to do what's right. In Philippians 4, verse 8, we read this verse a few nights ago. Let's turn back and see this verse again as it comes to thinking and having self-control over our thoughts. In Philippians chapter 4, at verse 8, Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things." I need to have a little self-control when it comes to my thoughts. Do you think sometimes negativity is something that we need to dwell on? Do we need to constantly think about negative things? I don't think that's good for the heart. We're going to read a verse on that in a minute. It's not good for the bone. It's not good for our minds. If we think about negativity all the time, we're going to be a negative person. So we need to think about positive things. We need to think about these good things, not evil things. We don't need to sit there and dwell on bad. I brought up last night the example of a brother that worships with us who keeps his volume loud on his TV, and every time we go to his house, you can hear the Fox News. And I brought up my grandmother. And one thing that I learned about that was, hey, that stuff wore her out because she thought about it all the time. She was worried silly about things she couldn't really control. And if we don't temper our thoughts and have control, we can worry ourselves silly over so many things in our lives. And a lot of them out of our control. And the Lord has said, turn it over to Him. Call on His name. Share with Him. Cast our cares upon Him. He cares for us. We need to have control and temperance when it comes to our thoughts. In Colossians chapter 3, just a page over, at verses 2 through 5, he says, "Set your affection on things above, not on things of earth." Well, if I'm always thinking about earthly things, how much am I thinking about spiritual things? If I'm always thinking about what's going on in my life, what's going on at home, when am I ever thinking about the church? When am I ever thinking about the brethren that have things going on in their life, others that I could do something for, help, or think about? When am I thinking about any? All I'm thinking about is things on this earth. He says, your affections need to be on things above, not on things of earth. For you're dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. Mortify, therefore, your members which are upon the earth: fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil conspicuousness, and covetous, which is idolatry. What about us? What are we thinking about? If I go home tonight, and the whole ride home, I'm thinking about eating me one of them popsicles, it's going to be a lot harder not to go to bed without eating one than if I don't think about it, right? Isn't that how advertising works? The Coca-Cola commercials, they show you a glass Coca-Cola, and you can hear the fizzing as it's being poured and the ice, and it's the sound that gets us, and you're thinking about it, then all of a sudden you're like, man, I need a Coke. And there's a lot of things on this earth that we start thinking about, and once it's on our mind, it's hard to get it off. So we need to think about positive, good things, ways we can do things for the Lord, ways we can grow, ways we can be better for the church and for the Lord. And when we think on those things, we're starting to have more control of our thoughts. We're tempering the things. I don't want to think about all this evil stuff, all the sinful stuff, all the things I can't control. I want to think about good things. I don't want to be carnally minded. Look at Proverbs chapter 17 at verse 22. Proverbs 17 at verse 22. He says, "A merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones." You ever met somebody that wouldn't come out of their house? They were just so depressed and so tore up, and everything was terrible in their life, and you couldn't even talk sense into them? That's what he's talking about. Just dries the bones. Because they've lost control of their thoughts, and all they can see is negative and bad in this world. My grandmother on my dad's side used to take the Reader's Digest. I don't know if any of you ever took the Reader's Digest, but we would go over there on Sundays and eat growing up. And when we would go over there, I would always find a Reader's Digest because I was excited about one thing inside of that Reader's Digest. And some of you may know where I'm going with this. But I always wanted to find laughter is the best medicine. That's what I was looking for. And I would try to memorize the best jokes in there so I could tell them to my friends at school and they would think I was real clever. And then after that, I would go get her newspaper, the Times Daily's the paper that we took. You probably get that here. And in the Times Daily, I would try to find the comics. I don't even know if they still make the comics. The other day I was telling my kids like they didn't have a clue what I was talking about. I wanted the funny stuff. I wanted stuff that would make me smile. Somebody comes and tells you, hey, did you hear what happened? I don't want to hear about that. Because it's just going to make me think worse of that. I don't want to know about all the evils out there. Now, sure, I don't want to be uneducated and lost and, naive. But I don't want to dwell on those things. I want to have some control of my thoughts. I want to have some temperance. And I want to be positive and upbeat and encouraging and loving and caring and kind. I don't want to be the opposite of any of those things because that's not like Christ. So I need to temper what I'm thinking about. Temper my thoughts and not let the world get to it. Let's turn to one more passage here. Turn to Psalm chapter 139 and we'll go to our last point. Psalm 139, look at verses 23 and 24. We sing this in one of our songs. I'm sure you sing it here, but it says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. And see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. I don't think a lot of people would truly sing that song if we understood what singing is. When I sing these songs in the songbook, I'm teaching and edifying. And I'm supposed to be living these words that I'm singing. There's a lot of days I don't want the Lord to know my thoughts. There's moments where I say, I don't want anybody around me to know my thoughts because I'm ashamed. Let's make sure that's not the thoughts that we're having. Let's make sure we can sing and say this. Search me, O Lord, and know my heart, know my thoughts each day. Let's temper and have self-control over our thoughts. And then finally, let's conclude here. We need to have temperance. We need to have self-control with our emotions. Wow. Was it just the other night I was watching a football game and after the game the players started fighting? You ever seen that before? You probably see it once a week if you watch ESPN. It happens all the time. And then sometimes you see it at a larger scale where it just gets real violent. You know what they said on the news the other day? The uptick in youth league sports fighting amongst parents and coaches. We're talking about physical altercations. It's at the highest level. They said it's just an uptick in youth league sporting events, parents brawling and fighting. And then probably sitting at church Sunday saying, well, it was him, it was her. What are we doing? We got 7- and 8-year-old kids watching us fight like adults. We got high school kids watching adults fight. I'm sure the Lord's real proud of that. I'm sure the kids are too. What a great example. What about our emotions? Think about emotions for just a minute. When you're extremely happy and super excited, do you always make the best decisions? No. Right? When you're extremely sad and something terrible's happening, do you always make the best decisions? No. So sometimes when we're having emotions in life, we need to get to an even keel before we make very important decisions. Before we make life-changing decisions. We need to make sure we temper our emotions. We live in a world that's led by emotion. People choose the church they go to and the faith they're part of based on emotions. Well, that church just made me feel good. I don't remember that happening in the New Testament. I don't recall that happening. We need to make sure we understand it's good to have emotion, and they can be good, but we shouldn't be ruled or live by emotion, or that's a roller coaster life we don't want to have. In Proverbs chapter 16, Proverbs 16, look at verse 32. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. It starts out with the emotion of anger there. We've already seen anger in a few of our passages tonight. But notice the last part of that verse there in verse 32. He that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. Somebody that can handle their emotions and rule their spirit, you're doing really well. You're doing good because there's a lot of people that cannot do that. Their life is an emotional roller coaster. In Proverbs 12 at verse 16. 'A fool's wrath is presently known, but a prudent man covers shame. You see, that's the idea of not being able to handle my emotion. I just got to let it out right then. I can't contain it. I can't control it. I can't have temperance here. Just got to explode and let it happen. It's not what we're looking for. We got to control that emotion. In Proverbs chapter 29, at verse 11, a fool utters all is mine, but a wise man keeps it in till afterwards. I got so emotional during that press conference today, during that parent-teacher conference meeting, at work in that business meeting. I got so emotional, I just wanted to say, but I kept it in. Probably a good thing, according to what we're reading here in Proverbs. And then in 2 Timothy chapter 1 at verse 7. 2 Timothy chapter 1 at verse 7. Notice what Paul says to Timothy regarding this point and this idea. 2 Timothy chapter 1 at verse 7. He says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." What about us? Do we have control and temperance there? Do we have a sound mind? A spirit of love and self-control, not fear? We need to make sure we handle these emotions the right way and have control there in our life. In conclusion, we've talked about tonight having temperance and self-control, but how do you do that? Right? It's easy to... You ever been to a baseball game? I remember this. And there's a kid pitching. And he just can't throw strikes. He's walked 4 batters in a row. What's everybody yelling? Throw strikes. Throw strikes. Throw strikes. Well, do you think the kid's dumb? I mean, do you think he doesn't know that's the goal? Oh, Coach, I'm sorry. I didn't know that's what we were trying to do. He knew he was supposed to throw strikes. He just can't do it. He needs to practice. He needs somebody to show him how to do his arm movement. He's trying to learn. He obviously can't do it. He needs some help. He knows the goal. Well, a lot of times as Christians, it's not that we don't want to do right. It's not that we don't know to do. It's just like, it's hard. I want to do better. I want to learn. I want to get better at this, but I need to practice. How do we do that when it comes to having self-control and temperance? Let's look at Daniel. Turn back with me to the Old Testament to Daniel chapter 1. If you're any bit familiar with the story of Daniel, he's such a great example of self-control and temperance. Daniel chapter 1, let's read starting at verse 8 and then skip to verse 10. Daniel chapter 1, starting at verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart, that's the key to this all, listen to that line. He purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Skip down to verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. So they do it anyways, and Daniel doesn't defile himself. Skip down to verses 15 and 16. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse. How did Daniel do it? How did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do it? How did they do it? Purpose in their heart. I'm not going to do this. They made up their mind. They made a resolution. I'm not going to do that. And that's what we've got to do. I'm going to temper my thoughts. I'm not going to think that way. I'm not going to dwell on these things. I'm going to temper my emotions. I'm going to temper and have self-control of what comes out of my mouth. I'm going to work at all these things and others we didn't talk about, and I'm going to try to be more Christ-like than I've ever been. I'm going to leave this building tonight and say, I'm not going to say those words to them that I've been saying. I'm going to do better. I'm going to have more patience for these things. I'm not going to react that way. I'm going to have better self-control and try to be more Christ-like. That way, I can have a better influence and impact on others. And I can grow into the Christian that the Lord would have me to be. I can be a more complete child of God than I was in the past. Just like a baseball player. That can't throw a strike, now he's throwing strikes. Couldn't hit a ball, now he's hitting the ball really well. Growing, developing. And another reason we want to do this, in Galatians chapter 5, when you see the fruits of the Spirit, just like we've seen in 2 Peter chapter 1, one of those things that he says to add to our faith, or that's a fruit of the Spirit, is temperance. That's a quality, that's a trait of a child of God. So in conclusion, do you have Christ-like temperance in your life? Do you have a lot of people's lives, they're just out of control. Their emotions are out of control. Their spending habits are out of control. Their reactions are out of control. Their words are way out of control. Do you have control of these things in your life? Do you want to have more control? Do you want to have more temperance in these areas? Well, how can you do that? Well, you can purpose in your heart. You can make up your mind that you're going to work at this, that you're going to do better. Why? Because we want to serve God. We want to please God, and we want to be with God in heaven. If you're here tonight and you're not a Christian, why not now? Why not make up your mind tonight and purpose in your heart that you're going to serve the Lord and serve Him the best you can? And by doing that, if you've never confessed His name or repented of your sins or been baptized into Christ, we've got all the time in the world tonight to stay here and assist you and help you do that. And we would love to do it. We're not in a rush. And if you want to study more in His Word to find out what you need to do to be a Christian, you're confused, we will study with you whenever, wherever you want. Maybe you've done that. And this is probably me speaking to myself and a lot of others here. But maybe there's some ways in your life you've lacked self-control and temperance. And you say, you know what? I just want to do better at this. I tell my wife all the time, I want to be a better husband. I don't tell my kids all the time, but I tell myself, I want to be a better dad. I want to be a better person for the church, whether here at Ephesus or at Piney Grove or wherever I can help spread the gospel or be what a Christian should be. So let's go to our homes and think about ways we can be more temperate and have more self-control in our lives. And just make up your mind and purpose in your heart like Daniel did that that's what you're going to do. And if we can help you in any way by praying for you or helping you become a child of God or studying with you, why don't you let us know as we stand and sing the song that Adam selected.
Let me say thank you to Mitchell for an extremely good lesson again tonight. We appreciate that. It's hard to believe that we've come this far in our meeting. Tomorrow night will be our last night of the meeting. Want to encourage you to come back and be with us tomorrow night if you possibly can. I know some of you will have other places you need to be, but if you can come back and be with us, we want to encourage you to do that. Want to remember Brian in our prayers. Also remember Bob. He had a treatment today, and let's remember him in our prayers. I want to just share something real quick with you. We was talking about golfers and them losing their temper and breaking the club. And this is actually a true story. I didn't see it, but a real good friend of mine did when we lived in Florida. There was a guy playing golf, and he had hit the ball, and about 4 of them went in the water. So he just took his golf bag, clubs and all, and just threw it in the lake. Well, he stormed off. Well, in a few minutes, he came back, rolled his pants up, took his shoes off, and waded out in the lake and got his golf bag. Came up on the bank, he unzipped it, took his car keys out, put them in his pocket, and threw the whole thing back in the lake again. He was through. So sometimes we need some self-control. But anyway, we are glad that you're here and appreciate your coming. Joe will lead us in our closing prayer, and then after our prayer, we'll be dismissed.
Thank you for safe travel, Lord. You allow everybody in this room to have to come and worship you, Father, and listen to the powerful message. Lord, thank you for the blessings, Lord, that you allow our families, our friends to have, Lord. Brian getting healed up, Lord, every day. Father, we thank you for that. Lord, I want to ask you to be the rest of folks on prayer list, Lord, throughout the community, throughout all the churches, Lord, in the area, Father. The prayer list is always growing, and Lord, we ask you to be, just keep them in the palm of your hands. Father, keep them safe the rest of the week and go separate ways, and bring us back tomorrow night, Father, if you will, that we can work again and use the Lord and one for. Father, thank you again for many blessings. In your name, amen.
Safe trip back home.
Good to see you tonight, man. Hope you have a safe trip back to Columbia.
Good message.
Thanks, man.
Good to see you. Appreciate you coming.
Still working. As a nurse?
Yeah.
So you're going to school now?
He's PRN right now, though.
Yeah, well, yeah. You can tell them he's still full time by their calculations, but I'll cut it back.
We'll see after that. I hope so. I know you're ready. It don't take long, does it? No. I was fine.
That's what Papa used to say, tolerable. He couldn't be, you right? Joseph. What'd you put him up for? You gonna wag him around in that tote there? No.